The wind hit before the sound did. Cold, sharp, wrong, pushing against the deck as if something below had exhaled through the metal skin of the ship. The night watchman froze mid-step, breath caught, because he knew the sea was calm tonight. Then the whistle rose from the lower deck, slow at first, then bending upward in a way no human breath should shape. His pulse hammered as silence rushed in afterward, heavy and expectant. The clamps of the nearest lifeboat clanged open on their own, metal locking pins sliding free without a single hand touching them. He backed toward the railing, heart sinking, knowing the logs would blame mechanical failure. But every instinct warned this was no accident. Something below wanted to be heard. Something wanted the ship lighter, emptied. As the last echo faded, a question formed inside him with an icy certainty. Who or what was calling him beneath the deck? Who whistled under the ship if no one was there? The night watchman moved carefully along the rail, listening for any echo of the whistle, but the deck had gone mute in a way that felt deliberate. The sea below lay dark and unmoving, as if waiting for something to happen on the ship before it chose to stir again. He checked the system logs on his handheld tablet, hoping for a technical fault, but the timestamp chilled him. Every clamp on the opened lifeboat had released at the exact same second. No delay, no variation, perfect synchronicity. Machines rarely behaved with that kind of intent. He tried to steady his breath, telling himself there had to be a rational explanation, yet a faint tremor in the metal beneath his boots suggested otherwise. It felt like the ship was breathing, pulling in air through its hidden seams, and somewhere below something might be walking. He walked toward the staircase leading down to the maintenance deck, each step hollow and metallic, echoing longer than it should. A soft draft curled upward from below, bringing with it the sharp scent of rust and brine, a smell usually trapped far deeper in the ship. His flashlight flickered, then steadied, but the momentary darkness made his skin crawl. He leaned over the railing, listening for movement, and the air shifted again. Another breath, another silent invitation. He remembered old tales sailors whispered about ships that kept memories long after their crews were gone. Stories meant to keep novices awake at night. But this didn't feel like a story. It felt like an approach. Something was changing in the ship's belly, and the dark was waiting for him to commit the mistake of going down alone. Footsteps approached from behind, too light to be the chief officers, and he felt a strange relief when a fellow crew member emerged from the fog. She asked if he had heard the whistle too, her voice low as if afraid the sound might return if named. He nodded, unable to hide the unease in his posture. Together they scanned the deck, the two of them suddenly small against the vast stretch of dark ocean. The quiet pressed in again with unnatural weight, making every gesture feel amplified. She warned him that passengers were waking, frightened by the noise and the distant vibration. The ship shouldn't have vibrated at all. The engines were running at minimal power, and yet something beneath them pulsed, slow and steady, like a heartbeat echoing through steel. They returned to the opened lifeboat, hoping to latch it back into place before dawn, but the equipment resisted them. The clamps refused to lock, pushing back with a tension more like muscle than steel. He wiped his palms against his jacket, unsettled by the sense that the lifeboat didn't want to be secured. Mara stepped away to radio the bridge, but the moment she clicked the transmitter, static roared loud enough to make her flinch. He stared at the lifeboat, feeling watched by something that couldn't possibly be there. The fog thickened around the hull, swallowing the line of the sea and sky until the world seemed reduced to the two of them and the silent, waiting boat. If this was the beginning, he feared what the night still held in its depths. The morning brought no relief, only a heavy stillness that clung to every corridor. The night watchman walked the length of the service deck with the unsettling awareness that the ship felt older than it had the day before. Crew whispered about strange vibrations, each one claiming they felt them first. He checked the digital logbook again, hoping yesterday's anomaly had vanished overnight, but entire entries were simply missing. Whole pages cleared as though wiped by a deliberate hand. When he tried to recover the files, the interface froze on an empty screen, the cursor blinking like a quiet warning. He didn't understand why, but an unease settled deep in his chest, telling him the ship had begun keeping its own secrets. As he closed the device, a memory surfaced of the whistle cutting the dark in two. Whatever waited below, it was not finished. He made his way to the passenger decks where early risers gathered in uneasy clumps, speaking in hushed tones. Rumors spread quickly. Doors rattling during the night, lights flickering in patterns, distant footsteps where none should echo. He found the elderly passenger seated alone near a porthole, staring not at the sea, but at the metal frame surrounding it, as though listening for something hidden inside. She told him that storms once stalked ships long before they formed in the sky, and sometimes the sea chose its claim before dawn. Her words were soft, yet carried a weight that lingered. He didn't know whether to dismiss her or fear she understood more than anyone else aboard. The way she touched the window's edge, as if feeling its pulse, made him wonder what she already knew. Back on the crew level, he overheard two engineers arguing near the maintenance hatch. One insisted the engines hummed out of rhythm, like something pressed against the hull from outside. The other swore he heard knocking in the pipes, steady and measured. The night watchman felt a chill remembering the synchronized release of the lifeboat clamps. Patterns were forming, patterns he couldn't ignore. He asked them for details, but both fell silent, as though speaking too much might invite more trouble. Their fear made his skin tighten. Whatever was happening wasn't random malfunction. It was organized, precise, patient. And the lower deck, the place everyone avoided without discussing why, seemed to breathe louder with every passing hour. He walked toward the archive room, hoping to find records of previous voyages. Dust gathered thickly on the shelves, almost untouched despite the ship's active usage. He searched for maintenance logs, route history, anything that might explain the missing entries, but all he found were blank sections where paperwork should have been. Someone had cut the ship's past away in careful slices. In the far corner, he noticed a folder left slightly open. Inside were fragments, torn pages marked with coordinates, weather reports, and scribbled warnings about a route taken once and never repeated. His throat tightened as he realized the ship was now retracing that same path. The air felt colder in the archive, as though the walls remembered what the pages had tried to hide. When he left the archive, the hallway lights dimmed for a moment, not flickering but deliberately fading, as though the ship itself were taking a long breath. He paused, listening. A faint metallic rhythm echoed from below, the same pattern described by the engineers. 3 taps, slow even, then silence. He leaned closer to the floor, and for a moment he could have sworn the metal warmed beneath his palm. The tapping resumed, this time beneath his hand, pulsing like a message from the deep. He jerked back, heart racing, realizing the ship was no longer just acting strange. It was communicating, and what it tried to say felt like a warning, rising too slowly to stop what was coming next. The night watchman returned to the upper deck, hoping daylight might sharpen his thoughts, but the sky carried a strange dimness, as though the sun itself kept its distance from the ship. He hadn't slept, and the exhaustion pressed against him like a weight. Yet the pattern of disturbances played again and again in his mind. 3 taps in the hull, 3 bursts of light flicker, 3 outages in the logs. It didn't feel random. It felt rehearsed. When he reached the lifeboat row, a sharp clang echoed across the metal walkway, and he froze. One of the boats rocked violently against its clamps, though no wind touched it. The movement stung his nerves with the same uncanny precision he recognized from the night before. Something was testing the threshold between unseen force and open declaration, pushing harder each time as though learning how the ship would react. And he feared it had nearly learned enough. He hurried across the deck to find Maris checking the electrical panels, Her brow furrowed as she traced the latest fluctuation readings. She told him the systems were failing in cycles now, every malfunction striking in sets of 3. He didn't need to explain what he'd just witnessed. The fear in her eyes showed she already understood. Together they reviewed the ship's schematics, searching for any logical cause. But the lines and labels only left them with more questions. The deeper they looked, the clearer it became that something beneath the main deck was drawing power. Not draining it, but redirecting it, feeding on it. A cold dread settled between them as the panel lights dimmed once more, obedient to the unseen rhythm. Whatever waited below was not hiding anymore. It was preparing. Later, as he crossed the observation deck, a sudden crash split the calm. He ran to the rail just in time to see a lifeboat hit the water below, bouncing once before settling crookedly in the waves. No alarms had triggered, no clamps had broken. The boat had simply fallen, as though dropped by invisible hands. He gripped the railing, breath trembling, and scanned the deck for movement. A soft whistle drifted up from below, a long, bending note that slid through the air like cold fingertips. It felt closer now, almost beside him, and he stepped back instinctively. The sound made the ship feel small, vulnerable, as though surrounded by something vast. The fallen boat bobbed helplessly beneath him, drifting away from the hull. Whatever force had released it had done so with intention, not accident. The historian found him an hour later, clutching her notebook as though it were a relic. She spoke quickly, pointing to symbols she had sketched. Old maritime markings known to warn sailors of drowned spirits seeking passage. Stories claimed they traveled in groups, always in 3s, searching for a vessel strong enough to carry them back into the living world. He wanted to dismiss it, but the ship's behavior echoed her words too closely. She warned him that the sea did not forget the dead, especially those taken unjustly. As she traced one symbol in particular, the deck vibration returned beneath their feet, slow and steady. Her voice fell quiet. The rhythm matched the legend exactly. For the first time, he realized the ship might not be haunted by chance, but by invitation. By late afternoon, clouds gathered unnaturally fast, their shapes twisting as though pulled by unseen strings. The Nightwatchman felt the ship tilt gently, not enough to trigger warnings, but enough to feel deliberate. Guided more than drifted. The intercom crackled with static, then a low hum spread through the metal underfoot, rising and falling with a pulse too organic to be machinery. He pressed his hand to the wall and felt the vibration thrum through him like a warning. The whistle echoed again, clearer this time, weaving through the hull as if moving toward him. Something deep in the ship responded with a groaning shift, and he realized the vessel was no longer just reacting. It was answering. Whatever waited below had begun to wait. Night crept over the ship again, thicker than the last, pressing against the windows like a living weight. The Nightwatchman descended the first set of metal stairs toward the maintenance deck, each step echoing with a hollow clang that traveled farther than sound should. The air changed as he went lower, turning colder and moist, as though he were walking into a cave carved beneath the sea. Lights flickered down the corridor in a slow pulse, syncing with the familiar 3-beat rhythm he had come to dread. He paused at the bottom of the steps, listening. No voices, no machinery, just the soft groan of metal settling in a way that felt almost like shifting breath. Something ahead waited in the dark, and though every instinct screamed at him to retreat, he knew turning back would only leave the ship blind to what moved beneath it. He followed the corridor toward the maintenance wing, the air growing heavier with every step. Pipes rattled softly overhead, as though something inside tapped them with patient fingers. He ran his palm along the wall, feeling vibrations shift beneath the surface, rising and falling like a heartbeat distorted through steel. As he passed a junction, his flashlight beam caught scratch marks gouged deep into the paneling, long, uneven, and fresh. He swallowed hard, running his thumb across the grooves. They weren't made by tools. They looked as though something had dragged across the metal with deliberate force, marking its passage. Farther ahead, a faint whistle drifted through the hall, bending in that unnatural way he could never fully describe, and he followed it despite the dread tightening inside him. The maintenance deck opened into a wider space filled with exposed machinery and humming generators. But tonight, the hum had faded into a muted drone as though the engines themselves listened. Ronan moved slowly, searching for signs of the crew members who should have been stationed here. Tools lay scattered across the floor, rolling slightly with the ship's unnatural sway. Yet no voices answered when he called out. At the far edge of the room, monitors flickered weakly, cycling through distorted feeds before settling on static. A shape passed across one screen, there for only a blink, tall, thin, gliding without the rise and fall of footsteps. His breath caught, a chill racing up his spine. He stepped back from the monitors, knowing the camera must have captured something that didn't belong in a place any living person could reach. He followed the direction of the distorted camera feed, moving past towering pipes into a narrower auxiliary hall. The air thickened, almost difficult to breathe, and the temperature dropped sharply enough to sting his skin. The fog that usually curled across the open deck now drifted here, impossibly, gathering in soft wisps around the floor. Halfway down the hall, he heard footsteps. Slow, steady, impossibly close. He spun around, flashlight beams slicing the dark, but nothing moved. The footsteps stopped as though reacting to his attention. He forced himself forward, pulse thudding in his ears until he reached the sealed bulkhead door at the end. It was slightly ajar, swaying with the ship's motion. No one should have been able to open it without authorization. The whistle came again, this time from the other side of the door, and the sound coiled around him like a beckoning hand. He pushed the bulkhead door fully open and stepped inside. The room beyond was colder than any space aboard the ship, breath frosting faintly in the air. Rows of unused storage containers lined the walls, each one trembling lightly as though something brushed against them from within. He approached the nearest, placing a hand on its icy surface, and the metal pulsed once beneath his palm, an unmistakable, living response. He staggered back, heart hammering, and the overhead light flickered violently, casting the room into alternating shadow and glare. For a brief flash, he saw movement behind the far containers, a silhouette tall and thin, shifting without sound. When darkness returned, the figure was gone, but the whistle lingered, drifting through the room like a secret finally spoken aloud. The ship was no longer just hiding something, it was housing it. The Nightwatchman hurried back toward the mid-deck, heart still pounding from what he'd seen in the storage chamber. The moment he reached open air, the ship felt wrong in a new way. Its movements no longer matched the calm sea. It rocked with a sluggish heaviness, like something pulled from below. He found the historian waiting near the railing, clutching her notebook with trembling fingers. She told him the truth in a voice barely above a whisper. The ship had been built using salvaged metal from a medieval war vessel that vanished centuries ago. Sailors claimed its drowned crew never found peace, and wandered the sea searching for a vessel strong enough to carry them home. He felt the blood drain from his face as the realization settled on him. Every whistle, every violent sway, every synchronized malfunction. They weren't random. They were the echoes of those who refused to fade. She opened the notebook to reveal a page filled with recorded legends, old accounts of ships that disappeared with their crews, only to return centuries later, silent and empty, drifting in perfect condition. He scanned the page while the historian explained that the missing ship was said to have carried warriors whose spirits clung fiercely to their duty. They were rumored to move in trios, forever bound to one another, calling out to the living through whistles, meant to lure sailors into the depths. He felt the deck vibrate beneath him again, steady and deliberate, matching the rhythm she described. A cold fear tightened around him. The ship wasn't being tormented, it was being chosen. And whatever force sought passage had begun using the ship's bones as its path back into the world. A sudden jolt ran through the ship, strong enough to knock them both against the railing. Alarms didn't sound, and he realized with dawning terror that the systems had been overridden from inside the hull. He sprinted toward the control hub, finding Maris already there, struggling to shut down a surge in the electrical network. The lights flared in bursts of 3, each brighter than the last, before plunging the room into heavy gloom. She shouted that power was being rerouted through levels that shouldn't be connected at all. He stared at the display, feeling the slow horror of understanding. The ship's inner layout was changing. The structure itself was shifting, like a living labyrinth rearranging its bones. And somewhere in those shifting corridors, the presence moved freely. They rushed back into the hallway, only to find the walls trembling with each pulse of redirected power. The floor beneath them vibrated deeply, as if something massive shifted far below. Ronan fought to steady himself, gripping a railing as he listened to the slow scraping sound rising from the lower deck, metal under strain, bending or bow. Maris grabbed his arm, eyes sharp with fear, insisting they needed to warn the chief officer. But before either of them could move, a new sound echoed through the corridor. 3 slow knocks, each one deeper than the last. The noise reverberated through their bones, and the lights snapped off for a heartbeat before returning in a pale flicker. Whatever haunted the hull had drawn closer, moving with purpose, moving toward them. They found the chief officer near the bridge stairwell, gripping the railing with white knuckles as the ship lurched again. He admitted that he knew fragments of the ship's origins but never believed the stories could hold truth. Ronan demanded answers, and the officer revealed that during construction, workers reported hearing voices inside the salvaged metal. Soft, hollow, rhythmic. The company ignored it. Now, as the ship groaned beneath them, the officer finally understood the truth. The spirits bound to that old vessel had found a new anchor. The whistle rose again from below, long and mournful, carrying a tone so human it made their hearts ache. But beneath the human note was something else, an ancient call seeking the living. And now the ship was answering with every shifting plate and trembling beam. A low rumble rolled across the ship, deep enough to shake dust from the ceiling panels. The Nightwatchman stepped onto the open deck and felt the air change instantly. Heavy, swollen, electric. Clouds spiraled above the ship in unnatural coils, twisting faster than any storm front should move. He gripped the railing as the first wave of wind struck, not from the sky but rising from the sea itself, as though the water exhaled with fury. Crew shouted orders somewhere behind him, voices drowned beneath the groan of the hull, shifting under pressure. He sensed that the storm wasn't weather at all, but a response, an answer to whatever stirred below. Lightning crawled across the sky without thunder, silent and sharp like cracks in glass. The ship leaned as though pulled by an unseen weight, and for the first time he felt the terrifying certainty that they were no longer sailing. They were being steered. He fought his way back inside as the storm thickened, finding Maris in the stairwell struggling to maintain her footing. They pushed upward toward the bridge, the ship lurching beneath them like a creature shaking free of chains. Pipes rattled overhead in chaotic rhythms, no longer following the familiar 3s. Whatever moved below had grown stronger, its influence no longer subtle or patient. When they reached the next landing, the lights burst in a cascade of sparks, plunging the hallway into pulsing emergency red. The ship's internal map flickered across a nearby display, its layout glitching, corridors twisting into shapes that weren't real. Maris stared at the screen with rising panic as sections of the lower deck blinked out entirely. The Nightwatchman realized these weren't malfunctions. The ship was shedding parts of itself, abandoning the old structure to make room for something new. They reached the bridge to find the chief officer shouting into a dead radio, static hissing like distant whispers. He turned toward them, face pale, insisting the storm wasn't on any radar. The ship's instruments spun uselessly, needles trembling as though unable to decide which direction reality lay. The intercom crackled, and for a breathless moment the whistle filtered through the speakers. Slow, bending, impossibly close. It felt like it came from inside the room. The officer backed away, insisting they needed to seal the lower decks before the hull cracked open, but the night watchman knew it was already too late. The presence had threaded itself through the ship's frame. The room jolted as another violent pull rocked the vessel, causing monitors to shatter and glass to rain across the floor. The storm outside wasn't attacking the ship, it was crowning it. A sudden alarm blared, one reserved only for catastrophic flooding, and the three of them sprinted toward the lower access corridor. Water surged around their boots before they reached the bottom of the stairs, cold enough to numb their skin instantly. The night watchman pushed forward, wading toward the source of the flood, but what he found made him free. The bulkhead doors, meant to seal off the lower deck, hung open as though forced from inside. Water poured through the gap in rhythmic pulses, rising and falling like the ship itself was breathing through its wounds. Shadows moved behind the doorway, tall and unbroken by the flickering lights. The whistle drifted outward, impossibly gentle amid the chaos, and for a moment it sounded almost like a call for him specifically. He stepped back, pulse hammering. The ship wasn't just filling with water. It was inviting whatever waited below to rise. When the next surge hit, the water carried more than seawater. It carried motion. Something glided upward through the dark flood, unseen but large enough to displace the rising waves. The night watchman felt the pressure of its presence before he saw anything at all. A weight settling on his chest as though the air itself thickened. The whistle came again, now echoed by a deeper sound beneath it, a low resonance that vibrated through the steel floor. He stumbled back as the corridor shuddered from bow to stern, the ship tilting sharply as though dragged from below. Maris screamed for him to run, but he couldn't look away from the rising water. Silhouettes began to form within the dark surface, three shapes emerging in perfect synchrony. Whatever had haunted the hull was no longer contained. It was crossing the threshold, answering the ship's call, and claiming it. The ship groaned under the strain of forces no storm could explain, tilting deeper as the water surged through the lower decks. The night watchman and the others forced themselves upward along the slanted corridor, gripping rails that shook beneath their hands. He could feel the ship's heartbeat now, steady, pulsing, matching the whistle's rhythm. Every breath tasted of metal and sea. When they reached the open deck, the storm had swollen into a towering wall of wind and spiraling clouds, folding around the vessel as though encasing it. The last lifeboat clung to its clamps, swaying wildly in the rising wind. He realized then that the ship had guided them upward on purpose, funneling movement toward a final destination. The whistle rose again, long and mournful, echoing through steel and sky. Something in that sound felt like a question, one only he could answer, and the sea waited below for his choice. Lightning illuminated the deck in sharp, silent flashes, revealing the lifeboat pulling against its clamps as though drawn by invisible hands. Garen shouted that they had to release it and abandon ship before the hull gave way. But the night watchman felt a deeper conflict twisting inside him. Each time he stepped closer to the lifeboat, the whistle softened, shifting into something almost pleading. The deck shuddered beneath them, sending Maris to one knee as seawater washed across the floor in cold sheets. He steadied her before the next wave hit. But even as he did, he sensed the three shapes below rising higher, nearing the threshold of breaching the surface. He understood then that the lifeboat was not just escape, it was invitation. And the choice before him was no longer about survival, but about who the ship would answer to when the storm reached its peak. Another violent tilt sent all three of them tumbling toward the rail. Ronan grabbed a support beam and pulled himself upright, lungs burning from the cold air. The water surged again, and this time, the silhouettes rose clearly, no longer vague outlines but figures emerging as though stepping through the sea itself. He couldn't see their faces, but he felt their presence like pressure behind his eyes. They moved in perfect sync, their motions fluid and unsettling, tethered to the rhythm of the whistle that now shook the deck under his feet. Maris screamed for him to get in the lifeboat, but the sound barely reached him. A strange calm settled over him as he realized the truth. The ship wasn't being claimed by force. It had already chosen, and he, standing at the edge between deck and sea, had been drawn into that choice from the first whistle. The wind roared as Garen lunged toward the lifeboat, shouting that they had no more time. Maris grabbed Ronan's arm and begged him to move, her voice breaking under the weight of fear and desperation. But he couldn't look away from the figures, nor ignore the pull that tightened like a rope inside his chest. The whistle curved through the storm, shaping a call that resonated with something deep and unspoken within him. The ship leaned harder, forcing them all to stumble. Water crashed across the deck, sweeping loose gear into the dark sea below. He knew he had to choose now. Climb into the lifeboat and cut the ropes, severing the connection and saving those who remained. Or answer the pull and step toward the rising forms that beckoned him with hollow patience. The storm held its breath, waiting. Orth, and it is search. Or, in a single breath, the choice became clear. Ronan tore free from Maris' grasp, leaping into the lifeboat and slamming the release lever. The clamp snapped open, and the boat lurched away from the sinking deck as the ship groaned like a wounded beast. Maris and Jaren jumped in after him just as the waves swallowed the rail behind them. The whistle rose again, louder than ever, but now it sounded wounded, denied. The three silhouettes submerged with sudden violence, the sea churning where they vanished. As the lifeboat drifted into the storm's fringe, the ship rolled onto its side, lights going dark, one by one, until it lay motionless in the water like an abandoned monument. Hours later, rescue lights cut through the fog, but when the team searched the derelict vessel, they found it empty. No crew, no passengers, no bodies. Only the drifting lifeboat proved anyone had survived. And somewhere far across the quiet sea, a faint whistle echoed, promising this would not be the last ship to answer the call.